Chapter 39, Home of the Future, Architecture, Part 5. Perhaps the final question to ask is, how will the advancements of the future direct our architectural pursuits? I think it's worthwhile to take a peek again at science fiction. The stories of the past are clearly directing progress in robotics and artificial intelligence towards increased consciousness and sentience. If we follow the line of progress that has led to buildings becoming more anthropomorphic over time, what would its next or final form take? What would it look like to live in something like a living building? We have seen computerized and robotic dwellings all over science fiction, most notably in starships. But the coldness of synthetic design is not conducive to the health and well-being of organic creatures. Living in the quarters of a Starfleet officer might be novel for a short vacation, but a window facing into the empty vacuum of space is not nourishing for the human soul. Comfort and familiarity are vital components of architecture that can help people to thrive. In the latter books of Frank Herbert's Dune saga, a common furnishing is the chair-dog, a seemingly non-sentient living creature whose sole purpose is to act as a shape-conforming seat for humans. They were trained to massage the people who sat in them without needing electricity or computerization. These strange creations are one of many products of the Bene Tleilax, the genetic tinkerers of the Duneverse, and their axolotl tanks, cloning devices grown from the wombs of their female populace. This was, of course, supposed to be disturbing to the 20th century reader, but it also highlights a quirk of Herbert's story. In the absence of computers and robotics, technological advancement often comes through bioengineering. This field is increasingly being explored by our own scientific community, either with too much or too little fear and trepidation, depending on who is asked. Of the latter group, Malcolm and Simone Collins often cite a passage from one of the important documents in their religion, The Martyrdom of Man by Winwood Reade, a 19th century utopian vision for human society to embrace science and reason and use them to purify their religious thinking. Reade was not an atheist, but believed in an ineffable and unknowable God who would not intervene in human affairs. Therefore, it was important to look towards technological innovation to immanentize the eschaton. Quote, "The three inventions, which perhaps may be long delayed, but which possibly are near at hand, will give to this overcrowded island the prosperous conditions of the United States. The first is the discovery of a motive force, which will take the place of steam, with its cumbrous fuel of oil or coal. Secondly, the invention of aerial locomotion, which will transport labor at a trifling cost of money and of time to any part of the planet, and which, by annihilating distance, will speedily extinguish national distinctions. And thirdly, the manufacture of flesh and flour from the elements by a chemical process in the laboratory, similar to that which is now performed within the bodies of the animals and plants. Food will then be manufactured in unlimited quantities at a trifling expense, and our enlightened posterity will look back upon us who eat oxen and sheep, just as we look back upon cannibals. Hunger and starvation will then be unknown, and the best part of the human life will no longer be wasted in the tedious process of cultivating the fields. Population will mightily increase, and the earth will be a garden." From William Winwood Reade, The Martyrdom of Man. His prophetic predictions have been partially fulfilled, certainly in regards to improved locomotion and air travel. As for the laboratory-grown flesh and flour, there's been some progress, not that most people are really excited about it, but I think Reade missed the bigger picture. The future of bioengineering is in architecture. If we scale Herbert's chair-dog up, why not live inside a house that is truly alive? This is, of course, a bigger ask than creating lab-grown meat. Once a slab of artificial beef has grown to the right size, it will be consumed long before it decays, at least once they get the taste right. But a house is meant to last indefinitely, or at least long enough to allow people to recoup their initial investment. So, what kinds of biological technologies could be used to create useful living spaces? Living tents. At the primitive end of the spectrum, we return to the tent. When we consider the first tents, their coverings were always made from biological material. There was no other kind. Woven canvas and wool are one type, but also animal skins. The tabernacle boasted 4 layers of organic coverings. The innermost was made of white linen with colored depictions of cherubim woven into the fabric. This was the layer visible from the interior. Outside this was a layer of goat hair, the outer layer of a goat, and on top of this was a layer of ram's skins dyed red, reminiscent of the bloody interior of an animal skin. And the final outer layer was made from the skin of tahas, a word whose translation has proved extremely problematic. It's been a matter of serious debate, with suggestions including a colored skin, the species unknown, but dyed a hyacinth blue. Other suggestions translate the word as many particular animals: ermine, badgers, and weasels, sea creatures such as dolphins or seals, an unknown creature of the kosher variety, or possibly an unclean animal or mythical creatures such as unicorns. A more recent and reasonable theory is that it refers to a beaded surface, a leather covered with some kind of enameled ceramic or possibly metallic beads. Footnote link provided below. Except for the dye or the ermine, a very dubious theory, most of these solutions do point to the utility of a very durable outer covering. Skins from sea creatures would suggest a good waterproof covering, while unicorn could mean something like a rhinoceros, certainly a tough-skinned animal. And a covering of mineral beads could act very similarly to something like roof tiles or scales, if implemented properly. Of course, the whole tabernacle aesthetic was deeply symbolic, but it's no stretch for the creator of the universe to design a tent whose symbolic elements would complement their practical utility. The womb-like nature of the tent has been established as a symbol, but perhaps there are other anthropomorphic qualities of tents and tabernacles to be probed. When we look back at the first mention of a tent in the Bible, we read simply, Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. Genesis 4:20. The connection of tents and livestock relates to the hair and skin of goats and rams used in the tabernacle. But what structure inspired the creation of a tent? It was almost certainly the cavernous interior of some great beast's rib cage, or its greater skeletal form. The opening act of The Empire Strikes Back depicts Han Solo stuffing the injured Luke Skywalker into the belly of his fallen Tauntaun to protect him from the harsh elements of the Arctic environment. It's easy to imagine a similar scenario among the ancient hunters of woolly mammoths on the icy tundra plains, especially as the darkness of night approached. It's no coincidence that the most common depictions of small tents resemble the legs and spines of a quadruped. Once they figured out how to preserve the skins, they could fuse the bones together or replace them with wooden poles and live inside a mighty creature. This is the imagery of Adam and Eve wearing garments of skin. They are given protection from the elements, but it also reflects another element of the practice of wearing animal skins. Throughout many cultures, people would adopt the personas or embody the spirits of various animals by wearing their skins like a uniform. The jaguar and eagle warriors of Mesoamerica, the lion hunters of Africa, and many more. While living as a predator or other mighty beast reflects the desire to harness their agentic qualities, living inside a creature would be a reflection of their superior arenic qualities. Sheep, goats, cows, as well as elephants, horses, and other large pack animals embody the spirit of community. The pack or herd is like a tent. The solidarity of the group protects them from the certain doom of isolation. The herd is a cultural arena that fosters freedom, the freedom to live, by restricting the choice of the individual. The individual is free to stray from the restrictions of being in a herd, but she is the one who will suffer, not the herd. Following the pastoral way of life is a very good strategy for helping your culture endure. It just won't have the greatest impact on the cultivation of the environment. Another animal-based housing solution is to mimic that of the tortoise, long-lived and lonely, but well protected in their hardened shells. The Greeks and Romans employed this tactic with their shield formations, and it's essentially the same idea behind our tanks and other armored vehicles. The tortoise strategy worked for a very long time against most predators, but humans are too crafty. Sadly, the same is true for humans who try to employ this survival technique. Those who build strong walls always seem to attract jealous neighbors. Bold steps. There is an inherent problem with trying to deduce the history and culture of ancient civilizations through archaeology. We can only judge them on what survives. If the United States were vacated tomorrow, the explorers 1,000 years in the future would likely come to strange conclusions. All the suburbs and rural towns would be reclaimed by the wilderness, but the urban centers with their skyscrapers would dot the landscape. Since they have no natural resources, archaeologists might assume that these were centers of worship used by roving bands of agrarian herdsmen. Unless we discover it through art, written depictions, or the legacy of cultures still in existence, we will have big gaps in our understanding about the use of organic elements that typically decompose. But what do we know? What we do know is that the most lasting designs in human culture often mimic the designs found in nature. While we might be reticent about eating meat grown in a lab, there's very little downside to reproducing other organic elements. We try to mimic the look of ivory, furs, leathers, and tortoise shells in artificial products, but our facsimiles are usually derived from substandard materials. A vinyl sofa wears out much more quickly than a real leather one, but the constituent elements will sit in a landfill far longer. Those particular items are luxury goods, and real is part of the premium. Lab-grown ivory will likely always be undervalued in comparison to the real thing for cultural reasons, but many other natural products are simply better than their artificial counterparts, and we should explore the possibility of making them cheaper and more available, especially if it does not require the killing of animals. Perhaps in the future, we could see homes with roof tiles made from lab-grown pangolin scales, tortoise shells, bat wings, or duck bills. Maybe the horns of oxen could be grown large enough to use as ductwork, or roofing trusses could be grown out of bone. House wrap and siding could be made from shark skin or rhino skin, or in gentler climates, the feathers of a bird. The greatest problem with making products from biologically derived materials is that they lose their most miraculous quality, cellular regeneration. Once an animal product is separated from the source of life, being natural or artificial, it's a product with an expiration date. Wounded leather doesn't heal. Dry bones don't mend. When we compare the constituent elements of a living creature to the thing itself, we suddenly find there is no comparison between the two. The sophistication of the one is as high above the other as the real leather is from the synthetic. The solution to utilizing this greatest ability of biological life is to bring the source of life along with the product. The feasibility of this is probably thousands of years beyond our current understanding, and it's not something anyone will be pursuing with great interest, but consider it as a thought experiment. Imagine a living tent, a biological creature in the shape of a domicile designed to house other living creatures. There would be no need for utility services because it would thrive off an active metabolic system. Plant fodder would be turned into heat, electrical, and kinetic energy. The circulatory system would regulate the temperature of the house, bring water to wherever it needed to go, and eliminate waste. The respiratory system would filter air from the outside, regulating its temperature and humidity. The doors and windows would operate with the efficiency of eyelids. Areas could become as transparent as the skin of a jellyfish to let in light. The interior floors and walls could vary from slick as a lizard to as warm and fuzzy as a kitten. You wouldn't even need furniture. You could rest in a giant bear's paw or nap in a kangaroo's pouch. The outside could be wrapped with birdwing arcades, protected from the elements by the scales and skin of tougher creatures, or decorated with the splendor of a butterfly's wings. The house could even move, allowing the inhabitants to migrate with the weather patterns, as warm or cold as they prefer. As each creature travels, it could digest the thorns and thistles, rotting carcasses, or animal waste, as different creatures have developed the ability to metabolize each of these. What would be left behind is fertile soil, enriched by the digested nutrients cultivated by the locomotion of the living domicile. Seeds could be deposited in the soil as the creature leaves a freshly planted garden in its wake. If we imagine such homes existed, the remaining question would be, how would we relate to these living homes? How would we maintain them, and how would we direct them to do what we wished? If they were fixed in one place, they would be dependent on us to prepare for the change in seasons. How would we know if they were damaged or if their systems were not working properly? If they moved, how would we discover their trajectory or steer them where we wanted to go? We now have smart homes, but they are completely dependent on a lot of dumb technology. Sensors and alarms are designed to make us aware of problems needing attention, but the onus is on us to interpret the data we receive and figure out the solutions. An exponentially more complicated house would require a far more sophisticated means of interaction. We can talk to our homes, though the services available through Amazon and Google are far more clunky than the communication between Captain Picard and the computer on board the Enterprise. Perhaps the best way to communicate with a living house would be to incorporate sentient communication, the ability to speak and respond. But this would create a dynamic relationship. Would a living house be beholden to obey a human command, even if it was detrimental to the health and safety of the domicile? What would prevent the makers of such homes from creating terrible beasts of destruction, or the owners from training them in this direction? What if the inhabitants decided to turn a wall into a shawarma stand, roasting and shaving the flesh of the living creature? What if the creature decided to engulf its inhabitants or drown or suffocate them with an immune reaction? We can see that this creates a whole realm of problems to solve in the interaction between the agent and the arena, and how much of each a living tent gets to be. When we consider how great the advantages of a living house could be, we should recognize that it is within our mutually best interest to come to an understanding. What is required from us is the willing surrender of our complete autonomy and independence. We must put ourselves in a position of trust and not betray the trust of those who place themselves under our care. Fractal architecture. What we see in this imagined scenario is something that scales and translates into every other aspect of our roles as sub-creators. First, we must consider our relationship with our own bodies. Are we serving them, or are they serving us? Or are we working together to serve a higher purpose? This also brings to mind the growing understanding of our relationship with the microbiome. We are living tents for billions of creatures that reside within us. We are either completely ignorant of the signals they are sending us, or we are totally enslaved to their wishes. They say, "Sugar, sugar," and we pour it down the hatch, not recognizing the distinction between the forces that build us up and the ones that wish to consume us. This scenario should also cause us to consider the relationship we have with all of our creations. Whatever we make, however temporary or insignificant, will reflect the values we hold dear. If a replicant is completely indistinguishable from a normal human, as Philip K. Dick wrote, except in name, then the cruelty or care we feel towards them is a pure reflection of the disposition of our own heart towards those we consider others. I believe much of the fear projected on technological futures around AI and robotics are really reflections of our own insecurities. We fear how the worst people will abuse them because the temptation to abuse resonates within our souls. Forbidden fruit does not satiate hunger, it inflames it. When we fall into the pattern of Adam and Eve, finding ourselves naked and ashamed, we steal what is freely given and consume the seeds that were meant to be our inheritance. The utopian vision is a lie, not because scarcity and decay are eternal truths, but because dependence is. We can provide for every material need of the human body and even learn to live in harmonious balance with the rest of creation. But if we cannot learn to make peace with our dependence on our own source, we will continue to pick dead fruit, wear dead clothes, and live in dead houses. We will struggle to keep our houses dry on the inside, protect them from the sun on the outside, and keep the living things from making our homes their own. The solution to building a house that lasts is to surrender our creations to the will of our Creator and let the light, the life, and the living water do with our lives what He will.